everybody to this month's Validator Connect community call. Last one took place about a month ago, and I think we got the universal feedback from all of you that we tried to pack too much topics in the call, leaving too little room for questions at the end. We do want to get you out of here by the top of the hour. So we're going to go through a number of updates, hopefully relatively quickly, and then open the floor for any questions the validator community may have, and we'll obviously try to address all calls. Our agenda, here we go. So I'll start with a brief introduction. I want to talk about validator governance as well. Then we have Ed Hastings, our head of engineering, who will give a core engineering update, specifically around the release of Casper 2.0. Joe Sacher will provide an update around the sidecar and really walk us through what the sidecar is, how what functionality it provides, how it can be configured. There's a lot of things that you as a validator get to choose there from a configuration perspective, and how to best optimize your systems. And the rest of the time will be open for Q&A. So I hope you have your questions ready. Brief intro. It's obviously been an interesting time since we last met. Particularly the last week has been interesting in the broader Casper ecosystem. Let's talk about a few things that have happened or are happening in the ecosystem, and especially as they relate to validators. There's a new liquid staking protocol being developed. I think they sort of announced themselves with a Hello World post to the world yesterday. This is developed alongside Casper 2.0 since it relies on new functionality in the protocol in order for contracts to directly stake and unstake on the network, eliminating the need for essentially centralized components, as is the case with the current implementation of liquid staking on Casper. And obviously, eventually, there will be opportunities there for validators to provide staking infrastructure as well and participate in that protocol. We also saw the announcement of COWL, C-O-W-L network, a DePIN project, which will rely on partnerships with validators as well for the product offering. We saw some other things being announced over the last couple of weeks. There are a number of new projects that, even though they've been talked about for a while, seem to be getting some attention this week, such as Outlaw Dogs and APOC, which are both NFT projects, as well as XP Network, which has been making some noise around their various new integrations with Casper for their cross-chain NFT bridge, opening up the network and ecosystem to the broader DeFi and general blockchain ecosystems. We saw Ledger Live making an announcement last week that CSPR can now be purchased directly in the Ledger Live app, which is a nice improvement and opportunity for the ecosystem. And we're actually finalizing a grant with a fellow validator who, let me quickly check the participants list now. He's not here today, but with Murat of Era Guardian to provide some new observability and monitoring tools for Casper validators, addressing some of the things that we collectively have discussed in our Validator Guild Telegram channel. Ed will, after this I'll give a quick update, but Ed will dive into the status of release candidate 5. The long and short of it is that we are expecting to finally cut release candidate 5 this week. If all things go as expected, Ed will provide more information on that. Validator participation and governance, very interesting topic. As you know, or as you should know, in a delegated proof of stake network, validators represent the interests of their delegators, right? So while you make decisions, generally, you do that on behalf of the people who have staked their CSPR with you. We've already talked in the past about how the Casper Association is moving towards a more decentralized decision-making structure. This will be a process over a number of months, but we've recently started with sort of the first examples of this. We held the first on-chain vote amongst validators. This was around the incentivized testnet program. Murat of Era Guardian put a quick UI together to show the results of that vote. And Mohammed actually did a great job putting the on-chain mechanism together in about 24 hours. It was a very nice example of when we all collectively wrap our heads around a problem, how we can jump on it and handle it in a way that that is transparent and effective and efficient. And I think it's a really nice indicator of where we can go with decentralized governance. And next vote is expected to be held in early December. That's for the proposal that's currently in discussion on the forum, specifically the Casper Association's community delegation program. For background, for those of you who have not followed the discussion or the proposal or the conversation in Validator Guild, as you know, the Casper Association has always delegated its stake and amongst community validators and rotated that periodically. There's been discussions about how we can sort of formalize the parameters around that program and make it so that the expectations are clear, process is clear, and validators can optimize or make sure that they're part of that program as long or as soon as these parameters are clear, right? So we're collectively discussing what those parameters should be. The validators will vote on sort of the outcome of that process, and the Casper Association will adhere to the outcome of that vote. These are examples of validator participation and governance that's currently taking place. As I mentioned, it's a longer process to get to like the fuller decentralized governance that we're hoping to get to. The next steps in that process are the following. As we announced about a month or maybe a month and a half ago, we want to open up the General Assembly membership of the Casper Association. Right? The Casper Association is a Swiss association which can technically have members in its General Assembly. The General Assembly is responsible for certain governance topics, such as electing the board of the association. We're working with legal on defining those parameters and hope to have that done before the end of the year, at which point we can open up membership of the association to all of you. Well, perhaps not all of you, depending on those parameters, obviously, but to the members or potential members that fit those parameters. Then we are refining our on-chain voting mechanism that we've also discussed in a prior announcement. So that includes really having a good mechanism to actually do this on-chain voting, and then making sure that delegators have the ability to make informed decisions about who they delegate with, because that means where their vote goes, right? So it's nice if we have an on-chain voting mechanism like we did with these prior votes, but there was no opportunity for delegators, for CSPR holders to basically know that a vote was taking place, when it was taking place, what their validator was leaning towards or expecting to vote, and then for delegators to decide if they agree with their validator's vote or whether they want to perhaps redelegate to another validator that better matches their opinion. And then finally, we need to implement changes to the Articles of Association for Casper Association in order to enable sort of the legal effectiveness of on-chain governance, right? So we want to end up in a situation where, and this has been described in a prior proposal, where there is a sort of legal binding nature to certain on-chain votes, and we have a path forward for that, but obviously the devil's in the detail with these things, and we're working with legal on figuring that piece out, which will certainly take a few months, but the goal is to get that done, obviously, as soon as possible in 2025. if there are questions about this, I'm happy to answer those in the Q&A section. For now, I'm going to pass the mic to Ed Hastings, who will update us on all things Casper 2.0. Ed, floor is yours.
Okay, so over the last month, the current state is all of the features of 2.0 except for the contract staking, which was added later, are merged. And I'm working on the contract staking. I've got a working model, and I'm basically adding tests and working through edge cases. So that's the last thing blocking the cut of the release, and I should have that wrapped up in the next couple days. Right? The other thing that's been going on that's relevant is now that the code is settled and essentially locked in, we were able to recalculate gas costs, and so we've got a set of opcode costs and host costs that was produced yesterday, and we're going through it, doing close analysis of it and running some edge case testing around it as well. So we should have those numbers put up on a PR either later today or tomorrow. So people probably want to review that. And then, yeah, basically with the contract staking merged and the new updated cost tables merged, we'll cut the release. So that's that. Meanwhile, most of the rest of the team has pivoted to working on downstream. So the Rust client and the sidecar primarily. And that work is proceeding apace. So anyone watching those repos should already have seen a number of PRs open and merge, and we'll see some more open and merge over the next week or two as we add additional support for new things that are available in the node that the client and the sidecar need to interface with. And so they're on track to be available and ready to go with the cut of RC5 and the pushing of that to DevNet. So that's it. That's the update.
Thank you, Ed, and thanks for the hard work of you and the team. And it's very exciting to get to the point where Casper 2.0 is feature complete, and the hopefully final release candidate is being pushed out, and we're working on downstream and essentially starting the process of getting this rolled out to the network. Fantastic work. Next up is Joe, who is going to discuss Sidecar with us. Joe, all yours, and let me know when you want me to move slides along.
So we'll go over the basic concept for the sidecar. We noticed, I think, about 50% of our releases early on were RPC changes for the node. And so what we're doing is uncoupling that so that we don't have node releases for RPC changes, which will allow us to iterate on RPC changes faster as needed. You also have the capability for event storage and querying those values with replay capability. And then it also isolates the node process from RPC. We've talked about it in the past being like a circuit breaker. It doesn't have to be on the same machine. It could be on a separate machine, but it allows a DDoS to take down the sidecar and not the node, which, you shouldn't really be using a validating node to provide pieces, but it still gives you some security there. Okay, Michael. So you have 4 basic servers, and there's a subserver on here, and you can enable either of these. So your RPC is a mimic of the RPC in the node now. We have speculative execution that you can turn on. The server-side event stream you can turn on, and then once that's enabled, you can do the REST interface to what's stored if you're doing storage. And we also have an admin server. That currently is just metrics. I think we'll talk about that later. But either of these is just enable server on or off. And so when you install it, the default mode is to mimic a node. You have RPC that's available, and it drops in, and the idea is that it's a replacement that's kind of transparent, other than the changes of that come with 2.0. And you can look at the various configs. in the sidecar repo. We're feet 2.0 until we merge that in, but we have example configs for RPC, for the event stream, a couple of different pieces to actually run this with an NCTL network locally to play around with it. And so that's a good place to look. The documentation on feet 2.0 is the feet 2.0 branch is pretty well updated. Jakob and the team have done pretty well with that. Go ahead, Michael. So for RPC, the node is currently on 7777, and with the upgrade, we're going to go to a binary 7779 port. And so all of the typical configurations that you have for the RPC moved over from the node, and they look very similar for the most part. There's a few added ones that have to do with retrying on your talking to the node and things like that. But at the 2.0 upgrade, what will happen, you've staged the upgrade, you've installed the sidecar, and the sidecar runs in kind of a waiting mode. And so it's waiting for the node to release that quad 7 port and to start that 7779 port. And at that point, the sidecar will run into a mode where it will actually grab that 7777 and connect to the node on 7779. And then it should look exactly the same with the difference of the, the changes to the RPC. Okay, go ahead. So with the event stream piece, you have the option of storing the events or not. That's what that disable event persistence is. If you want to look at the previous pieces, you may want to store it so you can query it using the REST interface we'll talk about. And you can store those with SQLite or with a Postgres instance. So SQLite would be all standalone right on that machine. Postgres, if you want other pieces to be able to talk to that, or other versions of the sidecar to kind of look there. And there's also an adapter piece in there. We're trying to make it as easy as possible to use existing code with the system as you work to upgrade. So if you enable this legacy SSE APIs, you'll have the events main deploys and SIGs, and it kind of looks the same way. So translation is done where possible for the blocks and different pieces. And I believe it's pretty complete of looking like the old style. And there's a document, a lot of readmes in the root, that legacy SSE emulation kind of gives some details on how that functions.
I have a quick question for you before we proceed, Joe.
Yep.
So from what I'm understanding from what you're just describing, so what used to be a single instance in essence, right, could now be 3 instances if you choose to separate responsibilities entirely, right? You could have the nodes on one instance, the sidecar on a second, and storage on a third. Is that correct?
Yes, you could run multiple sidecars pointing to the same node configured. One is RPC, one is event stream.
Okay.
If you wanted those separated. I believe we're working on the ability to aggregate together. I'm not sure where the status is on that. So the idea would be for the event stream, you could actually look to multiple nodes and it kind of aggregates those together. I know that was in place there. I'm not sure if all that's updated to the Condor pieces.
Understood. And the Postgres piece could even be like a managed solution, like an RDS or something, right?
Yeah, you have the standard, username, login type of piece. I think
Right.
my mic's overdriving a little bit.
No, you're fine. Or even get it on Redshift for data analysis and things like that, right? Like
Right. Anything Postgres compatible, I think, should be there. By default, we've disabled the event stream by default in the install because we don't want to create like a SQLite database on a node that starts storing those and you start chewing up disk space without people knowing it.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Going to your next slide.
And so you notice on the previous one, we had events main, events, deploys. Early on, we had just events, and at some point we broke them out. And I think we realized that maybe wasn't the best course of action. But what it allows us to do is go back to events with the new style while keeping the old sub as the old style. And so you can kind of consume both of them if you want. There's also event sidecar, and those are ones triggered from the sidecar. Now, those that have played with the servers and events, they're used to this start from ID. But the catch with that is it only goes to your buffer that's on your node, whether that's 5,000 or whatever. With if you're actually storing the events, you can buffer all the way the hell back to what you stored, so you could totally replay from your storage point forward, which allows you to test out software and different things. And you could actually, like you were saying, if you're going onto a Postgres, you could start up a sidecar that wouldn't connect, but would replay from, history to test out software, be a way to do that. Okay, go ahead.
Cool. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Sometimes. There you go.
So this is an example of some of the syntactic sugar that's added in to the stream. So if you look at this, we have, a stream we've cut out all the noise from, and I've also chopped out, the blocks. But when it connects to a node, you get that API version echoed out. And so that's your node version. And you have multiple block added, all these different pieces coming through. But when a node shuts down for any reason, in this scenario, it's shutting down for an upgrade, you actually get a shutdown that the event stream says, okay, this node disconnected from me and shut down from me. And then we see that it upgraded to a 1 because we got a new API version from it, and it starts flowing through. So it allows you to hook on a little more, metrics to the node and seeing what's actually going with it. And that's available. I believe that comes straight out the events, but it also is available right in events sidecar, just, the ones that's generated by the sidecar. Okay, next one. So the REST API that you can optionally turn on, this is what accesses when you have that event storage put in place. So a block would just give you the latest block, kind of like get block does on the client. Block/block hash or height drills down to that piece. And then transaction version 1, that's kind of the new format with the transaction hash. And there's also been, accepted, expired, processed. So if you wanted to set up a polling interface to this rather than consuming events, you could see, okay, this has been accepted to the node, which would mean more, especially if you were sending to a different node than you were polling. You can tell that the network kind of accepted it, and then whether it expired or processed. And then the next page has a few more. So your signatures for a given block, you can hit that. The step function, which is that big monster. And I believe we're in the process of implementing a couple more pieces onto the sidecar to filter down. We were just talking about that in daily. You may only want the auction info for a specific validator, so you don't have to chug through everything. They're kind of working through some improvements in that. And then faults, which we don't get many of, but that's available there. So the admin interface right now is fairly light, disabled by default, but it allows a metrics endpoint right now, and we can add in different pieces from it. And I just recommend everybody go into the sidecar repo there under the Feat 2.0 branch until that merges back into dev and gets released. The READMEs right in the root cover quite a bit, and there's some good diagrams of how all that functions. And then, as I had linked earlier in the presentation, the default configs, you can kind of reach in there. But that's as detailed as I want to go, and we can dive in a little deeper in questions if we need to.
Thank you, Joe. And we actually have a few questions already. Let me start with these because they're essentially all to you, Joe. First question is, are there plans for the sidecar to read the data directly from the database instead of the node's binary ports?
No, the binary port is going to be the interface for it. With LMDB, you kind of open an exclusive read-write lock with it. There's nothing to keep you from doing a read-only of the LMDB and going with it. But what you can actually do is cause contention with caching and different things. And it seems like it's an optimal solution, but it may not be. And Ed, maybe you want to add anything to that? Does that kind of cover?
Oh, you got it right.
Okay.
Next.
So do we test any storages with data size that are closer to mainnet? I've run quite a bit through SQLite. I mean, SQLite is good through terabytes. It's one of the most robust database solutions, that's been tested over, years and years, and Postgres can handle all that fine. So I don't see any issues with the size of the storages. And
it's also the case that it's insert only. So essentially, that helps quite a bit.
Yeah, it's just a flow forward. Is it possible to fetch lists of data or only individual entities? if you were querying directly, to the database, you can grab those, but to get the formats and the SSE out, I believe it's only individual currently. That shouldn't be too hard to implement. So part of providing these out here is showing, here's the current capabilities. What do we need? Are there blockers for your integrations with us? Let us know. We can implement there. Usually your groups, that to me seems like something that would be more of an RPC, where you could have a more richer query rather than a REST interface. So that actually may be syntactic sugar in front of the RPC, but it can be solved a couple different ways. So if you have a specific use case that you need, let us know, and we'll design around, making that easy to go. Usually when one person has a use case, it's more widespread needed. There's just only one person that went, hey,
Totally. Thanks for that, Joe. I don't see other questions in the Q&A app, but I wish I had the power to turn everybody's voice on here at once, but the meeting is configured differently, and the owner of the meeting is not here. So what I suggest is, if you have questions, either put them in the Q&A or use the raise hand functionality, and then I'll turn on your voice, and you can ask your question there. If there are no questions, then this was a very brief. We left half an hour for questions, guys. Okay, we saw somebody come up with a question. Any performance fixes in 2.0 for validators, especially related to the infamous bad peers issue? I think that would probably go to Ed.
So yeah, I mean, let me break that down. So for performance of a node for its primary function, yes, there are a variety of improvements across the node architecture itself. Around specifically bad peers, we've had. Can we clarify that? Like, what specific bad peer issue are we talking about here?
I think you have a situation, Ed, where the peers aren't performing adequately, and the rewards and things are kind of brought down. The whole network's brought down by that. And I noticed some of them could also limit peering between them if you have, a bad actor.
Sure. So we're talking about rewards. So basically, the new reward mechanism in 2.0 is totally different than the 1x. It is based on the production and collection of finality signatures. There is a number of blocks retroactive, a handful, that signatures will be counted. So if there's a peer that is not participating, they're not providing signatures, they're not reporting signatures, they're not forwarding signatures, then essentially they are not being rewarded. There is essentially a mechanism where the reward is for the production, that's half of it, and then the other half is for the reporting of it. So basically what should occur is, and the economists can speak to this, in more detail, but basically what should occur is everyone is incentivized to produce and report on every signature that they can. And if there's a particular validator that is underperforming, then it doesn't have an undue effect on the other validators. Essentially, their one signature is not available as part of the reward pot, but it's a linear issue rather than a scalar. So yes, you should, I encourage people to review it, but you should find that underperforming validators no longer drag the network to anywhere near the same degree as they can currently do.
And I just put on the screen a detailed article about validator rewards in Casper 2.0. You can find this on docs.casper.network under the Casper 2.0 section. So if you go to the top right of the navigation bar, there's a Casper 2.0 link, which has a number of articles as well as release notes for Casper 2.0. And a very detailed explanation of how rewards work in Casper 2.0. is available there. I saw another question come in. 1 second.
And we had
Do
one
we
on
have any?
storage usage.
Yeah, go. Do you want to read it out, Joe?
Yeah, do we have any benchmarks on storage usage? Also, would it be possible to keep the last few 100,000 blocks in active memory and archive history to a low performance storage to make storage optional if not running a full node? So the archive to lower performance, I'm not sure about that, but the current node allows you to sync to TTL and go. And so what that's going to do is pull the global state at the tip, and then you're going to sync back blocks and deploy as needed, and you can run forward with that. 2.0 reorg, I'll let Ed jump in right after this. It's adds some capability to do pruning in different pieces. Currently, that's not active as far as throwing away blocks that are in the history far enough that we don't care, but that can be in the works for 2.x, and that would allow you to have all of global state plus just a window of history going forward.
Thanks, Ed. Next question.
Well,
Oh, sorry.
that was Joe. But
Yeah.
actually, I did want to comment on that, right? So just to be clear, in 2.0, the ability to prune away global state at a particular tip, right, as we move forward, is present, is active. It's used for a variety of places where we previously would retain zeroed records essentially in global state, and now no longer do so going forward. All the pre-existing data in global state must remain to constitute the root hash, but going forward as of the first block of 2.0, we chew less disk and are able to tend global state to only retain relevant records. Now, beyond that, for 2.1 and so forth or onward, we can also extend that capability to allow more aggressive pruning outside of global state as well, which previously was either not possible or difficult, right? And the ultimate goal is to get to that moving window, but the moving window is not available as of 2.0, right? Just the underlying capabilities to make it even possible to do that are present, right?
Kind of the poor man's hack of that right now would be having two nodes, and you would sync one up to TTL when the other one gets large, cut over, go forward, and vice versa. Hopefully that gets eliminated in the future.
Yeah, you could also just, if you're not running a validating node, you can just stop the node, dump the database, restart, resync. But for validators, if you have continuity, obviously, you're going to want to be more careful around that. So,
and there's also the new argument, I believe, Ed, that went in where you can start a node only syncing global state and shut down. Right?
Yeah, for non-validating nodes, we also have support for an additional option in 2.0, where if you just want to grab periodic snapshots of the data, you don't need to follow block over block, then you can essentially put that setting in, essentially hook up to the network, acquire a complete block, and then it will automatically disconnect, and then you can use it as a repository for reporting and so forth. So
that also allows you to, when you're talking about spinning up a node and syncing, just to keep it small, if you use that as the basis for your node to spin up and sync, it would have a majority of what it needs to sync. Only from when you made that archive to current is all it would need to grab a global state, so you could have a node go really fast that's small.
Correct.
Thank you. I'll take the next one. Question from Victor. The validation voting policy is in its infancy and unbalanced. It seems unfair to allow validators to vote on CA policy that would only benefit themselves. Could you guys consider coming up with fair policy that would benefit the community with validation and votes? So a couple things. So first of all, you're right about it being in its infancy, right? We have done one vote so far, and the next one also pertains, as you're correctly pointing out, to essentially something that affects validators more so than the community. Obviously, with the and I think based on your question, you may not have read sort of the full announcement around what the plan is, but ultimately the nature of the delegator proof of stake is such that you as a validator have voting power on behalf of your delegators, right? In addition to obviously anything that you stake yourself. So if and when, not if, when we when we provide more visibility to the community about these votes, which is a high priority, if you as a validator are only acting in your own interest and not in the interest of your delegators, you'll presumably soon have fewer delegators, right? So it's a balance of making sure that you represent the interests of your personal community, right? Because that's what your delegators are, and engage with them around these topics, which is what we're, I think, collectively hoping to accomplish by providing visibility and mechanisms to engage around governance issues on the network. So you're right about the infancy comment. I think there's work that we're collectively doing to make sure that this becomes a sort of the community feels empowered in these governance topics, where really their delegation results in governance decisions that they stand behind. So that's definitely the objective here. Next question. Does Foundation have, and I assume you mean the Casper Association, have sufficient liquidity to launch new community development programs and sustain them? If yes, do we have some programs in pipeline for developers to encourage the builds on Casper 2.0? So the answer is yes, and I think I've addressed this in the past. The Casper Association is confident about its budget going forward, is working with developers on an ongoing basis. I mentioned in my intro about even a grant amongst this validator group for new tools. And obviously, we are continuously evaluating programs and opportunities to build with partners. And you should expect to see announcements around that, obviously, on an ongoing basis. Next question by Victor, I think, was a clarification. Any other questions? And again, feel free to use the raise hand functionality if you want to speak instead of write. Okay, I see another question coming in. XY, what is the plan to encourage proposals, discussions, and also make them fruitful to have results? In my opinion, so far, many topics have started and scratching the surface, but to me, it doesn't look like it doesn't look like things are going well because nobody is taking the efforts to complete them. I'm not sure how to address that question, XY. There's one proposal that went through the voting stage and was implemented or is being implemented. The other one is currently in the discussion phase, and as I mentioned earlier, a vote is expected in the next 1-2 weeks, and CA is committed to implementing it. There's a grant being discussed with Murat that comes directly from proposals and discussions in the Validator Guild. If you want to clarify your question, feel free to come on voice or add some more comments in the chat. But it is my understanding that, or at least it's my view, that proposals are being taken seriously, being acted upon, voted on by this validator community, and then implemented. Question from Mark. He is passing on a question from the community on X. Are there any plans to integrate CSPR onto base to allow wrapped CSPR? So I'll address this way. So I've talked in the past about the router protocol. So router protocol is currently wrapping up their integration. Their contracts are in security audit as we speak. And they help us connect with, I think, 35 to 40 different networks, including base, and are also offering app developers to build what they call router intent adapters to easily build UX around bridging tokens from and to Casper And more than that, it's not just a bridging action. You can attach a more complex intention to your bridging, which includes things like bridge USDC from base to Casper, and then swap it into a liquid staking token, for example, or whatever use case you may come up with. They are available to enable all those use cases. And work with our community of developers to maximize the exposure of Casper applications to the broader blockchain ecosystem, CSPR and wrapped CSPR to other ecosystems, and so on. So that hopefully addresses your question. What else do you guys have? Going once and going twice. All right. Sounds like, oh, I got another question from XY. What about performance comparisons between 1.5 and 2.0? So XY is asking about, I suppose, benchmarking or expectations around performance improvements between the 1x branch and 2.0.
The biggest factor there is going to be on network side because of losing the exponential validator discussion with highway. I think all the others are going to be fairly small. What's your thought, Ed?
Yeah, so basically let me break down the question into parts, right? So the side-by-side performance of a given node, if you were to run, let's say, an imaginary network with 1.5 and an imaginary network with 2.0, and run them at the same parameters to get a side-by-side A/B comparison, what you should observe is that the 2.0 has a reduced overall network pressure due to reduced amount of messages being sent. There should also be a reduction in memory allocated or used for purposes of serialization due to some internal refinements around some places where some serialization was occurring where it didn't need to, and some addition of some raw mechanisms that just use raw bytes. On the other hand, 2.0 is doing more things. It has more capabilities, more function, and so that then adds some additional overhead. So for purposes of performance, network usage should be down. Overall disk usage should be slightly less overall. And then certain operations are much faster, and then there's other new operations or behaviors that sort of eat that space up, right? Or use that reclaimed computation to do other things. So all in all, they're roughly comparable. The 2.0 is more overall efficient. So I think that answered the question.
Oh, it's XY is adding a clarification. He wants to essentially look at it from various aspects. So TPS, storage needs, which you addressed, delegator limit, validator limit, hardware requirements, API enhancements, etc.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, so I can break that down. So basically, overall transactions per second. The new transaction and block structure allows for a taxonomy of transaction kinds, whereas the 1x just has deploy. That allows a separation between native transactions, which have much smaller overhead, and they're just smaller. There's smaller arguments. They have no WASM. They execute about 10 times faster, so we can do more of those. And then similarly, a breakdown between for example, transactions that can install a smart contract are typically much larger. We previously couldn't differentiate between those and other deploys. We now can, and we've limited that down to, I think, 1 per block. It's either 1 or 2 per block, which basically means there's more space in the block for other kinds of transactions. So in the worst case, if a block is just an installer, well, that's TPS of basically 1 or maybe some additional natives. But in the best case, where you have a block that's just full of native operations, it's much higher. And then the overall average should be higher, right? So that should be improved.
And adding to that, Ed, is also with Zook that the block time could potentially become variable, right?
Yes, but we're not actually turning that on in 2.0, so that's more of a capability rather than a deliberate, right? But I will talk. I will talk to other internal improvements that we can then lead into with 2.1 and so forth at the end, right? Storage needs should be generally reduced, as I think I already alluded to previously in the snippet before this. We are there's some additional new things like reservations and so forth that have storage requirements that don't exist in 1X. On the other hand, the ability to prune away dead bids and some other places we're able to reclaim some space should even out to where we're writing around the same amount of data or less, right? It depends on how heavily people lean into the new features. If people go hog wild on reservations, or they go hog wild on, say, messages, for instance, well, they're leaning into new capabilities that require storage. If those features are used reasonably or not at all, then essentially the overall storage would be less. So it really depends somewhat on usage, but the internal systemic needs for the functionality that's the same is somewhat reduced due to the ability to prune away certain record kinds once they're no longer relevant. The delegator limit, I think we raised slightly. I don't remember it's a setting, but I believe we did push that up a little bit.
Yeah, we're
But
trying to make the changes slightly small so we have apples to apples comparison a bit there and make sure we don't overreach, and crash as well.
Right.
There's continual tuning after we hit the, rubber hits the road and we, start improving this.
So under the hood, I rewrote the way that the auction stores delegator records so that they're no longer embedded in the validator bid. And so they're now first level citizens. However, they still occupy space, and we traded the storage improvement, but it requires more computation to retrieve those records. So if you previously in 1X, if you retrieved a validator, while it's a big record, it contains all their delegators. So it's one big record fetch and deserialization. So, IO latency basically, and serialization overhead. Whereas now, if you're interacting with specific or individual delegators, is much faster because it's the single record. But if you do need to retrieve a validator and all their delegators, it's a lot. If you had a validator with 1,000 delegators, that's 1,000 separate reads and deserializations to rehydrate those delegators. So there's a trade-off, storage or computation at runtime for certain operations. So we're being careful. The go forward, we can continue to bump that number up and find the limits of it. But basically, we're being careful. So we did increase it a little bit, but certain operations, like the best case is much better, but the worst case is worse, and so that's kind of where that's at. The validator limit is currently still set to 100. Zug does potentially allow for, much higher validators, but we don't have a large enough network to test that on. Essentially we could do simulations, but to properly test it would actually require a bigger network. And so we can make some allowances there to start to, again, experientially walk that up until we find a limit. But right now, with the constraints that we have for the hardware available to us, we can't run a large enough network to truly verify the limits of that. So we're keeping 100. The logic itself doesn't really care. It's a setting, and so that can be creeped up if we want to start expanding that. If there's interest. Right now, I think that there's not that many additional people attempting to become validators, but if there was increased interest and there's more people that want to run validating nodes, we could certainly raise that up. And then the hardware requirements should be the same right now. And similarly, it's like the validator's choice. If the validators collectively want to start creeping up the minimum necessary hardware, then they can essentially make that determination. If enough of the validators agree to move to bigger hardware, more powerful hardware, well then, that makes more resources available and we can start scaling up the expectations and speed things up and so forth. So really the 2.0 logic itself is aimed at the same requirements as 1X. If there's a desire to have a higher raised expectation of reference hardware, well, then we can certainly lean into that. But that's something that the validators would decide, not us, right? And then similarly, API enhancements. So the Sidecar is the primary API for client software, has been extracted, as Joe alluded to allow it to iterate more quickly, and a variety of improvements have been added to that. On the node side itself, the binary port is a far more low-level primitive interface, but is faster and can be used by software that wants speed and doesn't necessarily want the same decisions that have been made for the sidecar or the JSON RPC. So if you had some like agent or indexer or something, you could go directly to the binary port and have higher performance, right? Because you're not dealing with JSON munge and so forth. So I would say that overall the API is better. It services both human or human / programmatic via HTTP or webish behaviors via the JSON RPC. It also supports systemic usage via the binary port. So hardcore system processes have a much faster option available to them without the overhead or burden of HTTP, right?
You could fork the sidecar for a custom instance, right? A custom indexer or something, or implement that binary port in a different language. I think Mark Greenslade did the binary port on the Python client as well. He's got that as part of it. So we're starting to flesh that out. The other question that came in, block time and
Hold on, actually, Joe, before we go there, since we're talking about API enhancements, can we quickly touch on some of the validator or node operator improvements that we've added from a sort of management perspective? We've talked about things like minimum number of the minimum delegation size. I know there's a ability to reserve slots. Can one of you describe?
Sure. Yeah, and I also did want to. It said I would speak to other capabilities in 2.0 that are not being turned on with the launch of 2.0 as well, right? So there's a lot of underlying architecture to support a variety of things, but they would require breaking changes, right? So they're gated behind chain spec settings. The functionality supports both the existing mechanism or something close to the existing mechanism, but can also be switched into a different behavior, and that's all in 2.0 as well. And so there's also the Zug protocol going in. It's going to be essentially field tested as we go through this. The theory of it should support a dramatically different, faster consensus overall, but we're keeping it close. We're matching, slightly improved, but basically matching the performance of the existing highway for safety reasons and for purposes of comparison. But as that protocol proves itself, we can start loosening restrictions that are in place to satisfy highways limitations. We can just start loosening those constraints, and those are in settings. They're not in code, right? The code itself is essentially being throttled by those settings, right? So as we go forward in a 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, et cetera, without having to make significant or any changes to the underlying logic, we can essentially unthrottle it, give it more, essentially allow it to use more of its capability, right? And then there's a lot of things like that in there. So I think that speaks to it. And then you had asked about management for a validator, management over your...
Yeah, in 30 seconds, because we're running out of time.
Yeah, so there's a variety of improvements to the validator tooling or validator API, if you will, to allow them to reserve slots for specific delegators, whether they're extant or not. So you could basically say, I have some set of delegations that I expect. They could even be your own if you're doing self-delegation, and you could just reserve those slots. So when you put your bid in, you can say, I'm going to have a total number of delegators or whatever, but I want to reserve some number of those slots for myself or my friends or my allies or whatever. So you can put in those reservations. And then basically what that does is it prevents anonymous or random or arbitrary delegators from taking those spots, right? You also have some ability to do custom delegation rates on those reservations as well. So if you have like a more favorable delegation rate that you want to produce or provide for those reservations, you can do so, right? You can also cancel reservations. So if you've reserved slots for one or more parties and that relationship falls through or whatever, you can cancel those and return it to the general population, basically. There's also some improvements around the redelegation experience, and then of course the contract staking is I think a general improvement as well, because it opens the door.
One
don't
quick
have,
question.
auto
So,
undelegation right yet for the dust.
yes,
So,
can
what
you
was
talk
what was
about
that?
that?
What was the
The
question?
auto undelegation for little dust amounts, so below a certain amount for a validator that's taking up a slot.
So the right, we'd spoken about that the last call, but I'll repeat it here. We also added min and max, definitely min, and I think also max on the delegation. And basically, if you have a min of X, any delegator below that is automatically undelegated. So it would essentially kick them
So
out and
it
open
would
those
be a
spots
best
up.
practice to set some reasonable min, so to take care of dust, essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you set that min to whatever, if it's min of 1, then that would basically just roll out dust. But if
Right,
you set the min to some higher number, same effect, and just
right.
to kick them out and reclaim those spots.
So we have 30 seconds left, so I'm going to cut things off here. Just one quick question that we haven't answered. I mean, there is another one, but the block time in 2.0,
It
Joe?
should stay the same 16 seconds. We don't
Right,
expect to speed it up or slow it down.
right. So that is the initial setting, and then as Ed described, we will tune that up over time as we
The
get
other
real
quick thing
worlds.
with that is Zug doesn't require powers of 2, so we can increment that very slowly.
Exactly.
Right.
And there is a lengthier question by XY in the chat that we won't get to here, but I'll paste it in the Validator Guild and can address it there because it's the top of the hour now, and we promised to get everybody out of here in time. I wanted to thank everybody for attending today and every other time and everything else you do on behalf of your delegators and the community. We will announce the next Validator Connect call, given that next month is the December holidays and New Year's and everything. We have to see if we can find the right time. I hope we will to do it next month. But by then, we should have great things to talk about with regards to real world experience around RC5 and progress on the downstream implementations. In the meantime, we are always available to you via direct message in the Validator Guild or where else you can find us. And once again, thank you for participating and thank you for everything you do on behalf of the network. See you next month. Thanks, everyone.